Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited to kind of cover Sample Manager and go into the different features. While I'm kind of talking today, please feel free to participate in the chat and also ask any questions that you might have, and we'll kind of cover things from there. So my name is Lance. I'm a product specialist here at LabKey. I kind of help folks evaluate the software, make sure it's a right fit for them. And I also help labs get fully onboarded and implemented with the software. Before LabKey, I was actually a lab tech and an account manager for an infectious disease laboratory. And there I worked with different LIMS, Excel spreadsheets, and paper records. So I'm really familiar with the pros and cons of each system. So this makes me really excited to talk about Sample Manager because I can see how we can help improve those different processes from labs coming from these systems and improve their sample management in major ways. So today we'll briefly discuss what to consider when looking at a sample management system, who LabKey is as an organization, and then we'll dive in deeper to a demo of Sample Manager. So we're going to kind of start off with a poll and feel free to participate. This is just kind of getting a gauge of to what kind of features you're excited for with Sample Manager. We have different ways of keeping track of samples, freezer management, workflow management, and assay data. So feel free to let me know, and we'll make sure to cover those features. But what should you consider when you're really looking at a sample management system? You want to make sure you're picking the right software. That way you're getting the most use out of it and your samples are being trusted. There's three major things to consider when looking at other softwares. First, what are your requirements? Can the software support your lab structure with the number of users that you have or any other special requirements your organization needs, like what different types of roles these users need? What kind of volume are you working with? Is it just the sheer number of samples that you have, or do you have a bunch of different sample types that you need to support? And then how are you planning on capturing your data and importing it into the system? Are you wanting to do it through the software's user interface? Are you wanting to import it through spreadsheets, or are you wanting to use an API so that our software can communicate with other softwares? Then we really want to think about the key features you're looking for. Are you wanting something that's easy to use, a flexible system that can help support compliance? Are you needing any additional features like barcoding or tracking a sample's lineage? And then it's also important to consider the vendor you're going to be working with. How does the vendor price their software? Are there any hidden fees with that, like with their customer service or the number of data fields that you're entering? What will it look like when you partner with these vendors in the long term? Do they support your growth, or is it going to be something that's more stagnant? Ultimately, do you like working with them? That's always important to know that the representative is going to be there for you and that you can rely on them should something happen or if you just have some questions. Having a better understanding can really help with your use case and making sure that you're more successful with the software that you pick. So that's just going to be kind of something to keep in mind as we go through Sample Manager. But what about LabKey as a vendor? So to give some background, LabKey started over 20 years ago with part of the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center here in Seattle, Washington of the United States. And we're experts in scientific data management. A lot of us were scientists back then, and so it's really software that's built by scientists for scientists. Not only that, but we partner very closely with all of our clients and making sure that they have all the support that they need and that our software is continuously growing in ways that they want it to grow. And with Sample Manager, we're also here to help you out too. We want to import your historical data for you if you'd want us to. We can get your system configured the way you want it and help train anyone that's using the software. So we really want to make sure that we're providing that excellent customer service that you deserve. And we also take your feedback very seriously and continuously to grow our softwares. Sample Manager has monthly updates, so we're always getting new features in and improving the usability of it because we want to make sure that you really enjoy using it and that you're successful with it. Now with Sample Manager, you're really going to see that we have three main pillars that we really focus on, which are usually the three main pillars that people have as requirements when they're looking at a new software. Our first priority is that data integrity. We want to make sure that the data that we're capturing is accurate, and it's going to be the type of data that you really care about. We have different data fields to make sure your data is being entered in correctly, like drop-down options, date fields, time fields, what have you. And then we also have a very robust audit log to track all the data that's going in and out of the system, and that kind of leads over to traceability. Not only can you track what changes you've made to your samples, but you can also track where they are in storage, where they are in their life cycle, and where they came from in terms of their lineage. Then there's our system flexibility. We want to make sure that the system adapts to the way you work and that you don't adapt the way you work to the system. So today we're going to be looking at a software or a sample of Sample Manager that's more geared towards clinical, but we can definitely configure it to look at different fields of science, such as mice brains and spinal cord sections, going into botany, geology, what have you. And we can also have as many different data fields as we need associated with your samples. So we're capturing all of that sort of information. So as we go into the demo, we're going to be covering the main features of Sample Manager, which are kind of divided into two different tiers. We have our starter tier, which has storage management, sample and lineage tracking, querying and reporting, and a full audit trail. And our professional tier has everything that starter has, but it also has our assay data management, an electronic lab notebook, workflow management, data partitioning, and API access. So depending on your needs, we can help make sure that you pick the right tier. And if your needs change over time, it's also really easy to grow with us, upgrade from starter to professional, or even look at some of our other softwares that we have out there. So as I kind of go into this, please feel free to chime in with any questions that you may have. Looking at our poll, it looks like we really want to cover our sample tracking, freezer management, and workflow. But we also have some interest in our assay management and our ELNs. So we'll make sure to cover those features as well. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll kind of keep an eye on the chat should anything come up. So this is my instance of Sample Manager. It would look very similar to what your instance is. Of course, there'd be some differences depending on your sample types, your different statuses, and whatnot. Here we have a basic overview of all of the samples in my laboratory. I can see the different statuses these samples are in. So I can see I have around 10,000 DNA samples that are available, and I have around 20,000 DNA samples that have been consumed. We have a list of all of our different storage units, so I can kind of get a basic idea of how full my freezers are. Maybe I need to think about purchasing another freezer soon, or maybe we're cleaning another freezer out and we need to think about how we're going to move our samples from one location to another. All of these freezers can also have the exact room and building these storage units are in. That way, it's just a little bit easier. You don't have to go room to room trying to find the right freezer. We have a list of jobs right here, and these are all tasks that have been assigned to me. I can also see a lot of the tasks that are currently pending in our laboratory. At LabKey, we're not very good at doing our laboratory work tasks. A lot of these are overdue, so we can also keep track of that. I also have a list of my recently opened electronic lab notebooks, so this is a great way for me to kind of quickly get back to what I was working on, but I can always create a brand new notebook as well. To navigate through Sample Manager, we have our dashboard. This is going to have a list of all of our different source types, our different sample types, our assays, and our storage units. We also have our projects, which is how we can partition data in Sample Manager. But right now, let's go ahead and look at our blood sample type. When I click on it, it's going to go ahead and bring me a grid view of all of my different blood samples. We also have all of these different columns of metadata. These are all sets of data that I picked and that I wanted to capture, and we can customize this to match whatever data you're needing. With these columns, I can filter through it and easily find samples that meet that criteria. So here I'm looking for all of my blood samples that have failed a QC state. Whenever I see one of these grids in Sample Manager, I can also select whichever samples I want, and I can export it to an Excel, CSV, or TSV file. That way, I can share this information very easily with someone outside of my organization. From this grid, I can also derive my samples and create aliquots or derivatives. I can assign samples to a specific assay, add them to a pick list so I can reference these samples later, add them to a workflow job, or add them to storage. To add samples in Sample Manager, you can also add it manually, or you can import an Excel spreadsheet to upload these samples. For right now, let's go ahead and look up my favorite sample, Blood 4733. This sample just has a lot of data associated with it, so I like to show it during these demos. When I click on this sample, it's going to show me exactly where it is in storage. I could also see this in my grid view. I can see how many aliquots this sample has and how many of those are available. I can see any electronic lab notebooks that this sample is associated with. And I also have the metadata that this sample has as well. If I go to my lineage tab, this is where we can really track our relationships that the sample has with everything else in the laboratory. So I can see that blood 4733 came off of this specific mouse and that this specific mouse is a part of this specific study. I can also see that this blood has these aliquots right here, and it also has these derivatives as well. So it's very easy for me to get a comprehensive view of relationships. If I want to go to my specific mouse and see the samples here, I can do that as well. And this mouse has a lot of samples associated with it. So I can just go to this mouse's samples tab, and it's going to pull up a list of all of these samples from this mouse so I can get some more information on what's going on. And it just looks like we have a question here. Do you provide hardware for label printing, creating barcodes, and scanner for barcodes? We don't provide the hardware, but our system can definitely work with a bunch of different printers and kind of labels and scanners. We actually partner with a third-party service called Bartender, and they can help create those labels. So that's a great question. And if your samples are already pre-labeled, we can work with that as well. So you can easily scan your samples in. We just don't want to limit the kind of hardware you're working with in case you have other softwares that you want to work with. But that is a great question. Thank you. Going back to blood 4733, I can also go into the assays tab, and I can do that on the mouse level as well. I can see a summary of the different runs that this sample and its aliquots, our trial samples, have. I can also see the different test results we have here. So might be useful if you're needing to track results over time. And I can just really get some more information on what's happening, and I can share this with others if I need. If I go to my timeline, we also have a sample-centric audit log. And this audit log is going to be really unique to us because we are a sample-centric system. A lot of other softwares are more freezer-centric. Here, I can see everything that's happened to this specific sample from the moment we registered it all the way to when we consume it. Even after we consume it, we hold on to this view so you can reference it later in case there's a quality event that's taken place. So if I kind of click on these different events, I can kind of see the timestamp, who did it, as well as what's changed or what they've done. We can also have comments so you know the reasons why there were changes being made. If an audit log is really long, you can also filter through it. So let's say I just want to see my storage events. I can do that, and it's going to just filter out everything that I might need. With these audit logs, you can also download them and share them with an auditor if that's needed. Moving along, let's go ahead and take a look at our storage. So our storage is something that I think is really great with Sample Manager. I think it's a lot easier than some other systems I've used. Here, when I click on the specific sample, it's going to highlight the exact row and column that the sample is located in, and it's going to show me this box map. These box maps can be customized, so if you have something that's like a 9x9 box, 8x4, that's something we can support. With these different samples here, I have all the metadata to the right, so I don't have to go back and forth between screens. I can also have this box's entire manifest. So if I'm shipping this box out, I can easily download a list of samples that's in here, so whoever's receiving it can quickly verify its contents. From the screen, I can check out my samples, move them to another storage location, or I can discard them. Right now, let's just go ahead and check out my sample. It's going to ask me for the reason for checking it out, and I'm just going to say for my demo. This is going to be immediately logged in my audit log. When I check my sample out, it's going to highlight the space as pink. This just assumes that we're going to be reserving this location, so no one else is going to be able to check a sample back into that spot. Once I check my sample back in, it's just going to go immediately to that spot, so I don't have to try to re-find another space. If you want to free up this spot, you would just move it to another place like a workbench, or you can discard it. But for right now, let's go ahead and check it back in. I'm all done with my experiment. And just keep an eye on this amount of 3 mils and this freeze thaw count of 22. When I check in my sample, it's going to ask us how much we used. So let's just say I used 1 mil, and it's going to ask if we want to increment our freeze thaw count, as well as for the reason. So I'm just going to say it's for my demo, just using a mil, and yes, I want to increment my freeze thaw count. When I check my sample back in, it's going to automatically reduce the amount we have available, and it's going to automatically increase our freeze thaw count. That way we have real-time information of what's going on with our samples, should you need it. You might also notice this red triangle here. This indicates that the sample is expired, so we may want to dispose of it as soon as possible. With these different boxes and these freezers, you can customize it. So these freezers can have as many different shelves and racks. When you're actually checking samples back into freezers, or if you're checking them in for the first time, it's going to show you how much space you have available in each one of those locations. So I'm just going to double check I have a sample. I'll just kind of create a brand new one so you can see what this creation screen looks like. We can enter in as much information as we need. We can associate it with a specific mouse or a specific patient. But for the sake of the demo, I'm not going to enter any information. I'm going to select this new sample. It's going to ask if I want to add it to storage, which I can definitely do. And we add it to storage. It's going to show how much free space we have. That way you don't really have to go from one location, opening up freezers, digging through, trying to find space that's available and risking your freezers going offline. So when I select my box, it's just going to go ahead and confirm this is the spot I want to check it in. I can move it if that's needed. I find also scanning my barcodes. I can scan in the sample IDs here for me to very quickly add a bunch of samples at once. But now I've added that sample to storage and I can see it's there. So that's kind of a basic overview of our storage, our basic overview of our samples. But some folks want to kind of capture our workflows. And our workflows is basically a step-by-step SOP that you need your workers to kind of follow, or your techs. And I think one of our great examples here is kind of going through we received these samples, we're going to run some tests on them, and now we need to ship them out. You can have specific templates associated with your workflows, and you can assign these different tasks to different technicians. When a tech is assigned a task, they'll receive an email, and they'll also have this pop up on their to-do screen for Sample Manager. They can go through each one of these steps saying, yep, I received these blood tubes. I've taken 1 mil alquat. Now I need to find my assay test results. These workflows will have specific samples associated with them, so you can very quickly see where they're located and pull them from your inventory. And then you can go to the assay screen, and then you can upload the information here if that's something that you're needing to do. And you can also do it from the task screen as well. If you're on that specific task, you can go ahead and upload it. One thing that's really cool with these workflow jobs is that you can also attach specific data associated with them. So if I want to go to my overview here, I can insert a tracking number for these, which courier number we have, and I can attach files like an airway bill for me to really easily reference. And then you can view this information very quickly from both your samples, as well as a list of jobs that you've had in the past. So this is kind of a great way for you to keep track of different assignments. Going to our ELNs, we can also view our experimental notes here. And our ELNs can also have specific templates associated with them. So if you're needing to do like a PBMC template, that's you're basically entering in your data here. That's how you can capture it. These ELNs allow you to have electronic signatures, and that can really help support compliance as well. With these ELNs, you can reference specific sources like your mouse or your patient, specific samples, and it works very similar to social media where you type an @ and then you basically tag whichever sample, assay, or source you're working with. So it's very easy for users to really pick that up since it's familiar to things that they use probably outside of work. With these ELNs, you can also insert really big pictures of your cat to show off during demos, but it can also be, science related things like pictures of plates, charts, graphs, and whatever it is that you need. We allow in-text tables, so you can kind of keep more organization to your templates. You can also attach files here as well. With these ELNs, you can collaborate with others and making sure that you're all kind of working together in a cohesive manner. And then you can send it off for someone to sign off and review the ELN and then download it as a PDF. So that's kind of a basic overview of our ELNs. And now you have your assay data, you have workflows, you have your samples in. That's great. But how do you find information? How do you find your samples? You can definitely go through our sample grids and filter through here, but I think another powerful tool we have is our sample finder. This tool, when I was working in the lab, would have saved me months of work in just a matter of minutes. So I think this is something that would be great for laboratories to really utilize. From Sample Finder, you can find samples based off of their lineage information or their assay properties. So one thing I like to show is I want to find all my samples from a specific mouse with a bulb C strain. When I click on this, it's going to filter through everything in Sample Manager, and it's going to find all those samples that came from a bulb C mouse. So this way I can very quickly select these samples, add them either to a report, run assays on them, or further narrow down what I'm looking for. If you're going to be running these searches a lot, you can save this specific search. And that's usually useful for folks that are needing to pull their expired inventory on a regular basis. That way they can quickly dispose of what they have. So Sample Finder is a great way for you to really make the most use out of Sample Manager, and Sample Manager can really help keep track of your sample information and your storage. But of course, you might want to play around with the software, and that's something that's totally valid. We actually encourage people to actually take trials with their sample manager instance. We have both self-led trials, so you really just dive into it on your own, and we also have guided trials where we can import a portion of your data for you and help get you some basic training. So that's part of our next steps. You can also get a personalized demo with me where I can really help answer some more questions. And I can also answer any or help make sure you get the right system. Can you still find the information for the checkout or discarded samples? Yes. Even after you check out your samples and you discard them, you can still find them with our sample finder and the sample grid. Some folks choose to filter them out, but that's not something you have to do, and they'll be very quickly and easily found. You can find them very easily. Um, so with that, I am going to go ahead and kind of open up the floor for more questions. But if you kind of want to do some more research on your own, our website's a great place to look. You can go to our sample finder or sample manager page. We have our pricing listed. We want to be as transparent as possible for you. And that way you can kind of make sure this is within your budget. Our pricing for starter is $99 per user per month. And that's for 5 users. For professional, it's $199 per user per month, also for 5 users. Our pricing does go down at certain tiers for the more users you have. So that's also something to kind of keep in mind. But if you have to leave them in the chat, and I'll stick around for a little bit longer. And thank you so much for joining. So some common questions some folks have is how long does it take to get implemented with Sample Manager? They've either come from a LIMS where it's taken years, or they're coming from paper records or Excel spreadsheets, so they're really not too sure what to expect. With Sample Manager, of course, it depends on the data and how much cleaning up we have to do and how much training there is. But typically it takes 4 to 6 weeks to kind of get started with Sample Manager and get you fully implemented and trained. And that's something that we actually support with our customer service, and that's included in our pricing. I would like to be connected with a third party for the hardware system. I would like to know the quote. Yeah, so if you want to know more about Bartender, it's kind of part of Siegel Scientific. We can definitely get some more information out there, but I would look at our automation license for Bartender. That's kind of what we recommend. I'm just going to give you their website for some of their technical aspects so you can kind of look more, and I'll drop that in the chat really fast for you. And of course, knowing which printer you want, that pricing can also depend on what your needs are. Some other questions we get is, do we limit the number of sample types you have or the data associated with them? We don't limit that. We don't charge any extra. Some other services will, but that's something that you can do. And we can also help make sure we get these different sample types customized to meet what your needs are. Any other questions out there? Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to schedule a demo, feel free to go onto our website. You can definitely get a demo here, or you can email us. I'm more than happy to schedule a time to speak with you further and get a trial set up for you. And I appreciate it. And thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.